when you choose something that powerfully against the advice of everyone else, in my parents and my friends' eyes and my teacher's eyes, that was the worst possible decision I could have made. It was completely unstable and irrational, and I had no context to really be doing this, or no experience or credibility. But I think life is so much more than that, and our talent and our potential is always there. If we wait for it to be validated or to be given permission by someone else, I think we really do lose out.
Thank you for tuning into the Why Influence podcast, where we interview influencers about their why and motivation for sharing online. I'm your host, Jeremy Siegel, and today our guest is Nicole Gibson. Nicole is CEO and founder of a nonprofit movement called Love Out Loud. She did a TEDx talk on it, and she's interacted with over 250,000 people during her tour across Australia. Her mission is to spread acknowledgement, love, and acceptance. Anyway, without giving any more spoilers, let's jump into the interview.
Welcome to the Why Influence podcast, where we deep dive into the why behind some of the world's most influential people. Why do you influence? Why are you an influencer? We hope to inspire you to share your voice with the world. And now, your host, Jeremy Siegel.
All right, well, Nicole, thanks so much for coming on show today.
So welcome. Thank you for having me.
For sure. So it's highly referred to you by my friend Pablo, who I met at a podcast conference. And he's saying that you're the Australian Brene Brown is how he talks about you. So he really pushed to have you come on the show. So I wanted to bring you on and see what you're all about.
Wow, that's such a big compliment, because I'm a very, very big fan of Brené's work. So it's very, very beautiful probably to say that. Thank you.
In maybe 2 or 3 sentences, can you just give like an elevator pitch about what it is that you do in regards to your influence and where you put your energy in for that?
Yeah, so I'm the leader and the CEO of Love Out Loud, which is a social movement which aims to impact 350 million people, or 4% of the global population, by the end of next year. The reason we chose that number is because supposedly many physicians, philosophers believe that that's a point of critical mass, a tipping point. So impacting them in messages of love and compassion, and giving them genuine strategies on how to live their life and run their businesses from a place of love and compassion.
Awesome. I've watched some of your YouTube videos. I've looked into your organization, and it's clear that you make impact in people's lives. So before we jump into your why, do you mind sharing maybe an unintended consequence that you received, like someone who told you that you had this impact on them, someone that maybe touched your heart?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I mean, the great thing about doing this work is, especially as a speaker and even in ways as a facilitator, you're constantly impacting people without necessarily even getting to meet them. Same with digital content. And I think that that's such a powerful thing, to know that your voice can go to places that you're not even aware until it comes back around. And in the early days of doing my work, I did a lot of speaking with teenagers in schools. And one of the most beautiful things has been when some of them have come back around like years later and said to me, like, there was actually a guy that I ran into at a festival maybe 6 months ago, and he ran up to me and he just gave me this massive hug, and he held me in this hug for maybe 30 seconds. I was like, I don't know this person, but it's a festival. Everyone's usually pretty loving. And then after about 30 seconds, he said, thank you so much for how you changed my life. And so listening, and I was like, have I met you before? And he said, no. You actually came and spoke at my employment agency. So he was unemployed at 15, not engaged in education. You came and spoke to us, and you shared with me your journey, and reminded us that we don't need to be defined by our past or the mistakes that we feel we've made or our failures, and shared that he was now doing his dream job, and he was employed and he was fulfilled, and that it was that talk that I guess gave him the permission for the first time. So things like that happens quite often. And it's a very beautiful feeling to know that that's potentially the trajectory of someone's life. But an interesting one, actually, a guy reached out to me on Facebook yesterday, and I found this super interesting. And he said, I still, to this day, and it was like 4 years after the event, think about a conversation I had with you in an airport lounge. And I actually didn't even know that this guy followed me on Facebook. And I was like, hey, nice to meet, nice to connect with you again. I can't actually remember this interaction. Can you just remind me what I shared? And what I said to him, all I said to him was, you don't have to hate what you do. And he was sharing with me the impact that that had had on him over those 4 years, and how he actually went on to leave his job and to completely transform his life. And I guess just giving someone that space, even for a few seconds, and really seeing them, just, yeah, I think there's so many unintended consequences, positive unintended consequences of giving people presence and love in a world that is often just like so busy and noisy.
Yeah, those are huge. Those are two really amazing examples. Thanks for sharing those. So what was the beginning? Like, where did this all start? When, for you to be in this position to receive these unintended consequences, you would have had to be speaking on stage to the first person and then have your brand and messaging in line to speak to the second person and get that unintended consequence. So where was the beginning in your eyes for your, I guess, your speaking career or your influence?
The beginning, how far do we want to go back? I really believe that we meet destiny halfway always. So I feel like there's big elements of my journey which really have felt predestined, like it's what my soul's here to do, and it was always going to happen. And I think because I experienced it like that, I had to go through some pretty massive adversity as a teenager to prepare me, and because I really believe and know and feel that through our own pain and through our own adversity and our own challenges and traumas, that's really where we actually develop empathy. That's where we develop patience. That's where we develop acceptance. That's where we develop these qualities, connection to self, faith in something bigger than us. And I think it was a really massive experience of understanding what's important in life, going through various mental health challenges, but a pretty significant eating disorder through my teenage years made me realize by the time I chose recovery from that there was no point or there was no fulfillment in following a life of anything superficial. And that really set me on this path. By the time I had my 18th birthday, I was ready to commit to this and to do this. And I ended up buying a van for like $3,000. And I was traveling to communities around Australia, speaking for free at schools in the very beginning, because I just believed in it so much. There was nothing that was going to stop me from doing this. And I guess when you choose something that powerfully against the advice of everyone else, in my parents and my friends' eyes and my teachers' eyes, that was the worst possible decision I could have made. It was completely unstable and irrational, and I had no context to really be doing this, or no experience or credibility. But I think life is so much more than that, and our talent and our potential is always there. If we wait for it to be validated or to be given permission by someone else, I think we really do lose out. So because I made those courageous steps when I was younger, yeah, I think the way I experienced the doors opening for me is maybe quite different to how other people experience life.
So you had these experiences when you were younger, and then on your 18th birthday, you created this nonprofit, you bought a van and started speaking at schools for the next 2 years to get this message out there. Why was it so important to you to get this message out there? Why are you so unstoppable right off the bat, getting out there, buying the van, not listening to other people, and just jumping into this? Like, what was driving you there?
I mean, if I was to really boil it back, because I could give sort of many answers to this question, but if I was to really get to the root of what it was, is I was in a situation with my mental health and my physical health as well, where it was pretty life-threatening. Like, it was a critical state to be in. And when you go through an experience like that, maybe listeners who have had extreme health complications that can relate, or maybe experience periods of really chronic depression or suicidality, when you get pushed to your edges in that way, you've got to ask yourself, like, do I want to live? And if you want to live, it's not enough when you're in that amount of pain to just be like, yeah, I want to live. You've got to like make a very powerful decision to live. And it gave me so much power when I decided that, because as soon as I made that decision, I wasn't actually really sure up until I made that decision, because I felt like I had no control of the illness that I was experiencing. So to take control back into my hands in that way and to commit the way that I did, yeah, it just propelled me, I guess, in a way that was just so, it was like a massive quantum leap in my life. And I guess the reason it propelled me in that direction of service to others was because through making that decision, I realized it was possible. And I knew that I wasn't the only person in the world that felt this pain and felt this isolation and felt this debilitating inner critic every single day. And I also knew at that point that it was possible to liberate myself from it. And I knew that it's possible for others to liberate themselves from it. And I didn't really have a lot of evidence at the time to know that I wasn't alone in my experience, because mental health was definitely not something that was talked about. Not even just mental health. Emotions were not something that was talked about, in my world. And I think a lot of other people's worlds, culturally, it was not okay. So it was really about following that fire and daring to lead and pioneer a conversation that every person had resistance to on some level, because I believed that it was important and I believed that it needed to happen, and I couldn't see anyone doing it.
Okay, so you had these experiences, and that's what really launched you to make you jump out of the gate full force. I mean, you decided to live, and if you're going to live, you need to make this impact. So why was it so important to you to impact these people? Like, what kind of impact were you looking to have on the masses, and why was that so important to you?
New possibility was the biggest thing for me. That when I looked at how we were living as humans and in our communities, there was just so much breakdown and absence of love, really. And the systems I went through to rehabilitate myself from my health, or to regain my health, were very clinical. They didn't involve a lot of human connection and humanization, and I was often seen as symptoms rather than a person. And I also healed myself from that illness in the end. Like, I was the one, really, when I stepped away from those practitioners and those doctors, that healed my body and my mind and reconnected to my soul. And the biggest piece in that was connection and vulnerability and love, starting with the self, being honest with myself, being vulnerable with myself, letting myself feel, letting myself be imperfect, that allowance. And through doing that for me, I started to do that for others and realize it's a very, very transformational thing when you can be held in that truly, not just to have someone say the right words, but to truly be held in that space of safety to come as you are. And I think that was at the time, and it still is today, actually, almost 10 years later, that's the medicine I think the world needs more than anything.
All right, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper here, but why is it so important for the people that you're connecting with to have connection and be vulnerable and feel connected to you or to other people? Like, this message that you're spreading, why is it important to those people to have that?
From their perspective, as in the feedback, or from my perspective for them?
Why is it so important for you to have these people have that?
Because it's what is most natural to us. To me, it's not about teaching people something they don't already know. It's about giving them permission to remember who they are, to remember the truth of what all of us are experiencing, which is an interconnectivity. Even if you want to look at it through the lens of science, like, everything is connected, literally. One of my favorite quotes, eventually everything connects. And through our own awakening, we realize I'm not actually just a single organism. I'm living in relationship to other things. So why do 80% of the world, or the Western world, I should say, feel lonely every day, when the truth of our existence is that we're always connected? Why is there an experience of so much loneliness and so much isolation, even when we're surrounded by people? And this is why it's important, because it doesn't have to be that way. It's not just for the lucky ones that find the perfect partner, or the lucky ones who have their dream job or get to travel the world. It's for all of us. And it's not about teaching you anything. It's just about helping you really unlearn the conditions and the insecurities and the limiting beliefs that are blocking you from having access to that experience that is always there and readily available no matter who you are.
Okay. Yeah. And I actually see that because I just got back from India and Africa, and you talk about the loneliness in the Western culture. In India, the people live with their families, and then when they get older, even their grandparents move back in. And so it's very fair. There's always people around. And even in Southern Africa, people live in these small villages, and it's all family oriented. So there's not much loneliness in those cultures. So I think it's awesome you're spreading that. And I guess a conclusion that I take away from how you're talking about this is you had these struggles when you were younger, and you found a solution that worked for you. And you don't want other people to have that, and you want to help people get out of it and also help people shortcut their path to getting out of it. Is that an accurate assessment?
In ways, there's a little bit of that languaging that I would challenge, because I sort of feel sometimes the pain that we go through is important, and it's not that we can save people from that pain, or I don't even really think love is about saving people from their pain. So the frame that I would love everyone to understand, and what I try and bring, the message that I bring is that actually it's okay when you're in pain, and it's transforming you into something greater. It's like growing pains, literally. What I would challenge is people's relationship to suffering. If you're in something, like you use the word shortcut, that to me is a shortcut. You don't have to necessarily go through huge amounts of ongoing suffering to learn. And because we don't have this sort of relationship, this conscious relationship with pain and with periods of transition in our life, like losing a job, like going through a breakup, like the death of a loved one, these are moments that all of us are going to have to go through in life. It is unavoidable. We have to go through that. So what's your relationship to that? How are you going to view that? And are you going to wait for these moments, these significant moments of transition? Are you going to wait for that for you to actually reflect on yourself and to reprioritize and to be forced into a position of growth, essentially? What I would love people to understand is we can be in this every single moment. Like every time you take an in-breath and an out-breath, you can be with the process of change and a process of letting go within yourself. You can bring it into every moment so that when you do come to these situations in your life, rather than it being so traumatic and shrouded with so much suffering, you actually know how to frame it, you know how to process it, you know how to feel all of the emotions around it. And what I see a lot of in the Western world is the opposite. There's a running away, there's an avoidance, there's putting on a brave face and pretending like it's okay. Our relationship to sadness, our relationship to grief, our relationship to these uglier emotions, anger, can often be surrounded with so much judgment that it's made us feel not safe when we're feeling that way to express what it is we're feeling. And I think that that's a disease, like that's a toxicity that is really affecting us as individuals and also as a collective.
That makes a lot of sense. And thanks for clarifying that. I sort of change it in a way of saying that it's okay to have pain, and that's your acceptance piece. And then your shortcutting's the helping people not have such elongated suffering. I mean, it's okay to suffer, but you don't need to drag that out. And that makes sense. It's really a selfless purpose, and I like that. It needs to be more people out there pushing for things like that.
Thank you, brother.
So as far as this whole journey goes, tell me a little bit about your speaking before you bought this van and did this tour. Were you comfortable on stage? I want to know what your foundation was going into this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first proper presentation I ever gave, I actually tell this story in my book, Love Out Loud. I was so nervous, and I had written it all out on a piece of paper, which if I was to give any advice to speakers, do not do that, and don't do that from the beginning. Don't write it all out. It's not about getting hung up on the details. It's the essence of what you bring that matters the most. But no one taught me that in the beginning. I had written it all out, and I was trying to read from this paper, and it was in front of 500 students, and I was about to go into a freeze response because I was just so nervous about it. And then I chose to connect. So I looked up from my page because I hadn't given them any eye contact, and I actually looked at them. And I chose in that moment to be vulnerable and share what was actually present for me. And I finished the rest of my presentation from that place. And I got a standing ovation.
Oh, wow.
And that was, it taught me so much. I'm very blessed that I had that experience from the very beginning. That, I guess, encouragement to be real and to be imperfect. And I would say that's very much my speaking style now. Like, I don't prepare. Like, my preparation would be to go to the talk 20 minutes early and have a conversation with 2 or 3 people that are going to be in my audience so that I actually can feel them and know them and understand what they're needing from me and how I can best be of service. But I guess even before I started speaking, I was a performer. Like, I left school at 14 to pursue acting, but acting can feel very different to speaking. Performing in that way. I was also a debater and a few other sort of key things that I guess gave me some foundation to be comfortable in front of people and being seen and being articulate, all of those things. But none of that can prepare you for sharing your heart, I don't think.
Right, yeah. I hear that a lot.
You can have all of the technique in the world, but it's the one thing that it can't be taught, I don't think.
This is the vulnerability.
Yeah.
So what are some times, maybe a big moment for you, it could be in the beginning or even recent, that you've had a barrier in your way, preferably like a self-made barrier, something that you told yourself you weren't ready for, and then you had to give yourself permission to then make that next step. Do you mind sharing something that comes to mind for that situation, and then maybe some stepping stones that you took to overcome that?
One thing that I've been reflecting on recently, and it's still quite present for me, is the nature of shame and how shame plays out for people. And it's something that really fascinates me, because shame is not just hidden often from others, it's hidden from us, our own awareness. Because when we've felt shamed, the nature of our ego, the nature of our mind is to protect us from never feeling that ever again. And I've been doing a lot of work around, I guess, deeper parts of my own shame. And doing that work has been so hugely transformational for me in my own ability to perform as an entrepreneur, to be a lover, to be a better friend, to be a better messenger. Because when we have these dormant parts of us which we feel shame for or towards, it prevents us from showing up in the fullness of who we are. And a lot of the time it's not even conscious. One thing that would constantly play out for me, and it was sort of exacerbated in a way by my work, was growing up I never really felt very comfortable or safe to communicate my needs. And I think a lot of people have had this experience, right? Like, you communicate your needs as a kid and you get either told off, or you don't have the amount of presence that you need to really feel like it's safe to communicate your needs. But this was so prevalent for me that it actually started to feel like I didn't even have needs, because I had been so, I guess, dismissive of my own needs and suppressing my own needs. And my way of keeping myself safe was to do the opposite, which was to appease the other person's needs, so to put myself last. That's how I kept myself safe as a kid. And this would play out in my life in all sorts of crazy ways. Like, an example would be after I gave a keynote presentation, for instance, if I was doing a book signing, most authors would stay for like 30 to 60 minutes max. They would do their book signing and then they would leave. But if people wanted to stay and talk to me, I would be there for like 3-4 hours. Like, I wouldn't be able to eat. I didn't drink any water. I didn't go to the bathroom. And it wouldn't be until I was back in my hotel room or in a car that I would actually be like, holy shit, like there's so many things that I need right now. And I had no awareness of that. And this would go on for years. It's only been something that I've recently challenged in myself. And it took actually like a pretty major breakdown where I was just so affected and so overwhelmed, and I actually didn't know where that was coming from. I didn't understand why I was feeling that way. So it made me start to inquire, what am I actually feeling? And what I started to recognize through doing this work, I'm working with an amazing practitioner that specializes in the felt sense. So bringing you into your body and what your body's actually feeling, not just the intellectual or cognitive mind. What I realized is there are so many things that I feel that I just do not acknowledge in myself, because it was never safe to acknowledge those feelings. And the mechanism was just complete disassociation. So if I would feel like me needing something, or I would feel unsafe, I would just completely disassociate from the emotion. And it's a super fascinating thing to be now more and more aware of every single day, those boundaries in myself. So differentiating the boundaries that I was taught, which is, this is what you should be able to cope with, this is what you should be able to handle, this is what performance looks like, and this is what normal looks like, versus what I actually feel in myself, and loving myself enough when I am feeling, actually I'm not comfortable with this, or I have to go now and it's not personal, this is just something I need to do for me because I need downtime or whatever. I feel so much more comfortable to do that in my own life this past year. And that's been so hugely transformational. And it all came from this deeper shame of being shamed for like my level of sensitivity and my level of how the world impacted me. As someone that can seem very extroverted, I'm actually hugely introverted. And in my work, it was also very validated, because people would say to me all the time, you're such a good listener. You're so good at holding space. You're so giving of your time. So these are things that actually started to be rewarded, which made it even more difficult for me to challenge in myself, right? Because I just started to have that identity of, I'm just a really good listener, or I am just the sort of person that is happy to be in service 20 hours a day. And I stopped challenging myself, and I stopped loving myself in the process of that.
That's really interesting, because so many people, even myself, talk about the importance of being authentic and being an authentic self in all these situations. Well, first of all, I like to break introvert, extrovert out in two ways. One is energy, one is communication style. So like for myself, I'm an introvert communicator, but extrovert energy. So I can be around people, not be drained, but I'm not really talking that much because I'm more of an introvert. So I could see you, I would just define you as being extrovert communicator, introvert energy.
Yeah, totally.
But going back, shame it's a really interesting topic because I think that a lot of people could benefit by diving so deep to start addressing the shame, to bring more authenticity to themselves. And even people that are feeling really authentic could benefit from this next level of addressing your shame. So I'm curious, what are some of the stepping stones that you've taken so far? Because it does sound like something you're actively working on, but I'm curious what you're finding as methods of figuring that out or overcoming it.
Yeah, I first just really want to reiterate that share of shame really being like another level of diving into yourself. And sometimes being your authentic self doesn't look zen, it doesn't look calm, doesn't look perfect. And I think that can sometimes be misconstrued in amongst this, I guess, movement of people that are more wanting to live in a conscious way and relate in a conscious way. I think maybe the other side of that is it's become kind of like it needs to look like this. If you're conscious, it needs to look like this if you're authentic. And I think that's the opposite of what those things actually mean. Right. So the steps for me have been to start looking for the signs that aren't obviously linked to the shame. So because of the nature of shame can be quite sneaky, it's had to be, otherwise you would catch it. And the nature of shame is there so that it's not seen. So I think that's really the entry point, is there might be symptoms right now in your life that you're not even thinking that that's shame, but actually conscious. You're not aware of the fact that that's coming from shame, a deeper shame in you or a deeper guilt in you. Some of the keys for me were looking at things that I felt that I didn't really have a conscious explanation for. So, or behaviors. Like the icing on the cake after that breakdown was I started to become very, very, very triggered with my partner over things that weren't really, if you looked at what I was actually getting mad at, it wasn't equal. Like my trigger was so much deeper than what was being presented. And that was a huge insight for me. I was like, okay, well, there's clearly deeper things. I'm feeling something deeper than just this situation. I shouldn't feel this abandoned, for example, just because I'm not seeing the person I love for a couple of days. Like it's not that big a deal. So that was an insight. The second thing was looking at my defenses. Where was I getting defensive about things? And because I know for me personally, I'm quite a confident person, when I am expressing a defense, I know that people in my life have felt very challenged as to challenge me on that, because when someone's self-assured and they're certain, but it's actually coming from a place of defense, it can be quite a difficult thing to bring up to someone, especially if that other person isn't sure enough in themselves that they can see it as defense. So I think that was playing out a lot in my leadership and in my friendships. Maybe my friends could see this vulnerability in me, this vulnerability that I was jumping on the defense to protect myself from. But because I'm so sure of myself in so many ways, they never felt comfortable to challenge me on it. And this has been hugely insightful for me, because now that I know this and I understand that there are things that you see in me that I can't see in myself, I'm now very consciously choosing to navigate my relationships inclusive of that dialogue, and to create enough trust and safety to say we were establishing a friendship, to actually communicate and say, I know that there's things that I still feel subconscious shame around, or I still have insecurities. I still have things that affect me emotionally, wounds that might come up in our relationship. And I want to be in a place where I'm open enough in my heart and in my mind to be able to have a conversation about those things as they come up. If you see them in me, if you see me withdrawing, or if you see me justifying, or if you see me defending, what would it look like for us to have safety in our relationship, for you to be able to challenge me on these things to help me grow, and vice versa. And that has been huge. The evolution that I've seen in my friendships, the deepening, and then as a consequence of that, what I've noticed is my own belief around my lovability. Because before I believed that I could only be lovable, which is where so much of the shame came from, and so many of the defenses came from. I only believed that I could be lovable if I was perfect. That was the deep belief. So anything that I deemed as an imperfection or a failure crippled me with this subconscious shame and made me distance myself from anyone that I thought could potentially see that imperfection. And it's a very isolating existence. It was making it very difficult for me to feel loved and feel connected. So through practicing this in my relationships, I'm loving myself so much more, because I'm like, oh, I can fuck it up, and I can fail, and I can be imperfect, and I can get it wrong, and I can be sad, and I can get angry, and the people who love me still love me. It's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. Yeah, in the last conversation I had with Patrice Washington, she's got a podcast, and what she did is she talked about how her and a friend sat down and made a list of over 200 vulnerable stories about herself that she was able to then use that for things. And I think that you're talking about is another method similar to that. Like, it's really important to know your why getting into creating an influence or working on these things, but it's also important to be vulnerable with that. And all these exercises are really important for that. And I think that what I took away from how you described this is you want to build a self-awareness of when to pay attention when something comes up, and also enroll others to do that for you. So if they see you having a struggle or being defensive, expressing ahead of time that you want them to dive deep into that so that you can grow. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it's huge permission for the other people as well, because it's all of a sudden when you ask that of someone else, they feel comfortable to ask that of you.
Right. Very cool. I like that a lot. With where you're at today, what's inspiring you most about the future? Well,
the 2020 vision that we're working towards is like, that's what I live and breathe and think about 24 hours a day, even in my dreams. That's everything for me at the moment, is hitting that vision of engaging 4% by the end of next year. And the reason, I guess, or that I know I'm so committed to that, and I live and breathe it so much, is that is going to create a different vibrational reality for humans, to be able to come from a place of love, for that not be this like rare thing that you meet someone that can actually hold space for you, or actually you feel listened to by, or to feel compassion. I want that to be the default. I want that to be what's normalized. And what excites me about that is think of the possibility that would come for us if that was just our meeting place, if that was our ground zero, if that was our foundation. When you look at, say, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what I find really interesting in that model, if you don't know it and you're listening, you can look it up, but it's a pretty famous model of the 5 human needs. When you look at the top of his pyramid, which is the 5th need, it's actualization. And just under that is self-esteem and a sense of purpose. And when you look at this movement in the West around consciousness, I think a lot of it speaks to actualization. How do you be actualized? How do you be self-realized? How do you have really great self-esteem? Or maybe it's more communicated in how do you be confident? Or like learn your power moves, those sorts of things. But that's assuming that we've actually fulfilled these lower segments of the pyramid, the first being our physiological needs. And that's followed by a feeling of safety and belonging. And in our world today, we do not have the first 2 tiers of this pyramid. There are many, many people in the world that don't have their physiological needs met. And there's statistically, most people in the West are definitely not having a need of feeling safe and secure and belong, and like they belong in the world. Mm-hmm. So this movement, this is where I want to get us to, that baseline. All of us feel that. We feel a sense of belonging. We feel a sense of safety in the world. And using that model as a frame of explaining this, what we can then build on from this greater purpose as a collective consciousness, and to eventually realize the truth of who we are as a species. Like, that's what drives me. That's what I get excited about. That's why I'm driven as an entrepreneur. That's why I'm driven as a messenger. I want to get us to this place because it's possible for us. And it's a lot more possible than people realize.
Yeah, and that's a huge goal, and I think it's achievable. I'm sort of curious that before we started the podcast interview here, we talked a little bit, and I asked what your biggest platforms were, and you talked about speaking and your organization. But this reach that you're talking about having by the end of 2020, I'm curious what your strategy is as far as platform to have that reach is, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, sure. So obviously a large part of that number is digital, needs to be digital in order for the scalability and the reach, and engaging the right sort of leaders, influencers, messages, celebrities, attracting that sort of talent to speak about Love Out Loud. You know, what's different about Love Out Loud is it's not just a matter of getting them to wear a t-shirt and say, I stand for love. It's actually breaking love down into something that's very easily explained and digested and genuinely helpful. Part of what I appreciate about some of the questions you've asked me in this podcast is you're looking for that pragmatism and that actionability for the user to be able to take this information and apply it. I'm very, very passionate about that. And everything that we've created, Love Out Loud is a movement, yes, but it's also a technology. It's a methodology. It's a philosophy that when you read the book, when you come to a retreat, when you attend a seminar, when you experience a workshop, when you do the online course or courses, it's all following a methodology that is very, very simple. And it's in the simplicity that it's so transformative. And I think there's a lot of messengers out there that do stand for love, but when they talk about it, when musicians talk about it on stage or they sing about it, people feel it, but they don't know how to take that and actually apply it in their life. What are the elements that are making 30,000 people at a festival, say 100,000 people at Glastonbury, feel so unified, feel so connected, feel so with each other? Well, there's principles in that. And this is what Love Out Loud's teaching. It's breaking that down in a way that people can actually understand and bring into their own life. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that would be a way to achieve your goals, is to enroll the messengers, is how you expressed it. So I'm curious, if you enroll these messengers and have them talk about Love Out Loud, what's a major technological platform that you want to focus on to drive that traffic to for 2020?
Facebook community, and eventually Instagram as well for influencers. And eventually I would love to build an app that assists us in managing community, because when we have this amount of people enrolled in the movement, there's huge opportunities in how we mobilize those people, the change that we can really begin making in the world. And we could do a whole podcast on sort of the vision that I have for how that would look and how we would develop that. But yeah, having a centralized space where Love Out Loud is accessible and easily integrated into the day-to-day and keeping people engaged in the practices. It doesn't have to be something that you spend hours and hours and hours learning every single day. It's designed to be naturally contagious. It's designed to be very easily actionable so that, in my language, someone can develop a real fluency. Because the frame, when you strip it back, is understanding that there's only ever two choices. So it brings everything down into a very simple model of love and fear. And it's about helping people recognize, where is this fear playing out in subtle ways that you might not currently be aware of, and what does it actually feel like for you to make choices in love. And then it breaks it down further into, these are the 9 key areas, concepts, principles of love. And it's also very important that users go through it sequentially. This is what I noticed working in mental health for so many years, is lots of people are aware, like, you need to be honest in order to heal. You need to have acceptance in order to heal. You need to be grateful. How many people have a gratitude practice? I think where it's not really getting cut through is it would sort of be like just picking up a business plan and going to page 178 and just trying to action it from that place. Like, there's stages and phases that are important to go through in a certain sequence to understand and embody love, which is what Love Out Loud takes people through. And I can really see this being something that we can build into an app in a way that's very effective, that almost becomes like a game. Like, I would love to gamify it for people, so that cool. It's a natural part of what it is that we're already doing and how it is that we're already living their life, but more consciously.
Awesome. Well, I think you'll get there, and we can talk after. And if there's anyone I can introduce you to, I'd be happy to help you on your journey.
Appreciate that.
So on this podcast, we define an influencer as someone who's making an impact on a community. And I would say that you've created a community and you're making an impact on it. So for the sake of the podcast, we're going to call you an influencer. But for someone who hasn't started out yet in their influencing journey, what would be some of your biggest pieces of advice to share to that person if they're looking to start a movement or start a platform or start a nonprofit? Like, what would be some big pieces of advice for that person?
It's a great question. I actually put a content piece up on my Instagram just yesterday about influence. And my take on influence, because I think it's quite poignant to this question, is you're already influencing. You might not be aware that you're influencing, but even by walking into a room and saying nothing, you're influencing the room. And the power of understanding your influence is you start to bring conscious awareness to be able to choose how you influence. Because if right now you don't consider yourself an influencer, it's just an absence of awareness. It doesn't look like you can only be an influencer if you have 100,000 followers on Instagram. Like the influence that I've had, say, working as a commissioner in the federal government for 4 years when I was very, very young, like 19 to 23, that's not reflected in my Instagram following. But the influence I made in that time was very, very significant. And that was intentional, focused influence by me taking ownership of that influence. And that goes right down to when there was a man 3 times my age judging me from across the room. How am I going to influence that situation? Am I going to crumble in my own insecurity, or am I going to stand strong and understand that he might be judging me, but at the end of the day, I have his attention. What am I going to do with that attention? How do I want to influence this? And this is an awareness that when you start to develop, you will become very, very, very powerful, because the way that you influence the world is completely unique to you. It can never be threatened unless you're not aware, and then you become the one that's being influenced, but you're still influencing that space nonetheless. So yeah, I guess to summarize that, it would be whatever you really want to do, of course it is possible. You wouldn't have the idea, you wouldn't have the concept if it wasn't possible for you. The importance of influence is really being able to be strong and confident and own how it is you and only you are going to be able to influence reality and influence others towards that goal that you have for yourself. And it's 100% possible.
Awesome. I like that a lot. And you're actually the first person that talked about building a conscious awareness of your influence, whether you have influence or not, because everyone has influence. I like that.
Yeah, it's been my journey is like, refining that. Just for me, it was never about trying to gain influence, trying to get more followers, but what I found is by becoming more aware of how I was influencing situations, those opportunities naturally came.
Very cool. So you've been able to successfully build a movement and foundations of bigger movement that's to come. What would be some secret sauce that you feel like you've used, something that you're doing that's different than the average person who's building influence? What would be some advice that you give to someone who's already influencing and how they could level up using some of your tactics?
Come and learn love out loud. No, I'm kidding. It's an expansion of what I just shared. Really is a big insight into how I navigate growth and how I navigate influence. It's all internal first. How do you become more aware? Love for me love and compassion have become very, very, very foundational in growth for me. So I guess the thinking around that, or the experience of that, is love is naturally abundant. So when I'm sitting in a space of love, I naturally get more traction. I naturally get more opportunities. I naturally become more magnetic to life. And so internally, my practice the question is, how do I deepen and broaden my capacity for love? And how do I become more aware of where fear is playing out in my life? And the more I do that work, rather than being so distracted by all of that things on the outside, which can be very overwhelming, especially for me because I'm very emotionally and energetically sensitive, to bring that back to myself and that responsibility back to myself is hugely empowering. And I do see massive results through navigating it like this. I also find that I'm not needing to be on edge around being like really opportunistic. Like I look at people, like many people in networking events, for instance, and everyone wants something from the space. They get so stressed about connecting with that person or this person or getting that opportunity or winning that pitch. And I don't really find myself ever stressing about these things, because for me, the most important thing is, how do I remain in a space of love? And what's funny is I will usually end up connecting with the person that everyone else wants to connect with in the room, because there's no force. So that's been a massive thing in my journey, is to always bring that power back to me.
I like that a lot. And it brings to mind actually another guest that I've had, because you talked about how love is naturally abundant. And by talking about love, you're creating more in the room, and it's creating this like critical mass that compounds on itself. And one of my previous guests, Elaine Fluker, she's got a podcast called Support is Sexy. And she talks to women entrepreneurs, and it's all about supporting other women entrepreneurs. And it's a movement that when you put more energy into it, it brings more people in and it just lifts itself. So I see how what you're doing could really grow to something big, and I'll definitely introduce you to her and try to get you on there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's very, very similar ethos, the same ethos, really.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing your why. Before I open the floor for you to talk a little bit more about your stuff or do whatever pitch you want to give, Do you have any last words for our audience here? Like, you know that there's a lot of listeners who are struggling to start or wonder why it even matters to share, or maybe in their early in their journey of sharing. Do you have any last words that you think could be useful to them?
So many. If the biggest pain point in your journey right now is knowing when to start, my greatest advice, I guess, would be to understand that, one, we're all dying. Literally, we're going to die. And at the end of your life, you're going to be reflecting on these moments of hesitation. And there's a very, very high chance that you'll experience regret if you don't listen to that call, if you don't listen to that impulse, because it's not about the outcome. It's not about whether you succeed or whether you fail. It's actually about living. It's about being alive in a moment and allowing yourself to have that, to have those experiences, no matter what the outcome is, like to love anyway, even if you get rejected, to start the business anyway, even if it fails. It's not about the outcome. And often we can feel debilitated because we think, what if it turns out like this? What if other people judge me? But the reality is you either get comfortable with the fact that we can't control someone else's perception of us and we also can't always control outcomes, or we live in a self-constructed prison in the fear that other people will imprison us. And this is why fear is such a fascinating thing, because so many people won't start because they think other people are going to judge them. But to protect themselves from the possibility of that fear playing out, they judge themselves for eternity. They create the prison that they're afraid other people are going to create for them, and they get stuck in that place. And I see this so much. But through the doing, through the actioning, through the courage to do it anyway and be imperfect in it, regardless of how it looks, you will learn, you will naturally become bigger, you will naturally become more expansive, you'll naturally become all of the things that you fear that you might not, because that's inevitable. It becomes what you choose, and whatever you choose becomes your reality in one way or another. It might not look the way you think it's meant to look, but it will still be moving you in that direction.
Wow, that's powerful and awesome stuff. Nicole, I'd like to end the podcast with giving you the opportunity to talk about your brand, your social accounts, your courses, your book, anything else you'd like to share with the audience. And just keep in mind, in the show notes of this episode, I'll be linking to all your stuff in there as well.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, I mean, I guess the best place to start would be Love Out Loud runs events all around the world, Europe, US, New Zealand, Bali, Australia, and we continue to expand too. So if things that I've said have really resonated and it's something that you feel you really want to go deeper into, our retreats, our facilitator training be a really amazing place and space to do that with pretty incredible practitioners. I'm very, very intentional about who I bring together to host those events and spaces. And you will very much be looked after and be very safe in that. So all of the dates for next year, for 2020, on our website, love-outloud.com, but we will link them, so that's all good. If that feels like too much of a stretch for you, you can just begin with the book. Just read the book. Yeah, that's amazing. There's an ebook, there's going to be an audiobook that will be up next week, and paperback versions as well. Start there. We also give away the first module of our course, which is the video version of the book, basically, where I break all the concepts down. We give away the first 10 videos, so you can find that on the website too, just under online course. And if still none of that resonates, but you really connect to what we're doing, join our Facebook community or find us on Instagram. Our Facebook community, our closed community, is a really great community of people that are constantly reflecting and sharing and being vulnerable and setting challenges. And it's an ever-growing community they really care. So if you're looking for a space online to maybe get some more resources about self-love or develop yourself, that can be a really great place to start too. The group's called Love Out Louders, LOUDERS.
Awesome. Nicole, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your journey. I hope you have a great remainder of 2019, and I look forward to seeing your influence keep on growing. And hopefully we can actually do an update sometime in the future as your why evolves and as your journey evolves.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Well, that concludes the interview. I think you'd agree that Nicole is an amazing person doing amazing things authentically and selflessly, which is perfect as a guest on the podcast. My favorite nugget that Nicole shared is when she was talking about shame. She talked about how it's hidden not only from yourself, but also others. And if you're able to address shame, then you can be a deeper level of your authentic self. And that's something that nobody else has brought up to me before. Everyone talks about needing to figure out how to be your authentic self and being vulnerable, but I haven't heard anybody talk about shame. And I think shame is another layer down to really dive deep into yourself. And I really appreciate her bringing that up and also sharing the steps of how to look for that. I think it's very valuable to helping you get more comfortable with sharing. Now, Nicole was unstoppable out the gate. On her 18th birthday, she created a nonprofit, she bought a van, and then she just toured around Australia for 2 years, speaking and reaching over 250,000 people, trying to spread her message. And I think that one takes a lot of balls, but two takes a big why. I mean, you need to overcome people telling you that that's stupid. You need to overcome other people telling you that that's not the norm. And she just knew that it was the thing that she needed to do, and she felt passionate about it, and she did it. And I think that is really important. To reiterate what Patrice said in last episode, you just need to trust your system. And her system was this, and she put full faith and full trust in it. And I believe that it worked. And that's really important. Just trust the system. Something a lot of guests actually struggle with is the term influencer. I think that it's a little bit overplayed, so people don't like being seen as it or being attributed towards it. But Nicole was very accepting of it and actually understood it at a pretty deep level. She said that whether you know it or not, you're an influencer. If you walk into a room and say nothing and sit in the corner or sit in the middle of all these people, you're influencing that room just by having your presence. If you talk to someone, you're influencing them. If you're posting on Instagram and your family sees it, you're influencing. So Nicole really understood what influencing meant, and I appreciated that because it made the conversation easy. But also, it's just something that's good to reiterate is you are an influencer, whether you know it or not. And it's just if you share more authentically or share more deeply or vulnerably that you can make a bigger impact with that influence. So Nicole thought it's very important that you have this self-awareness around your influence. A common suggestion we get from our guests is that you just need to start. You just need to start sharing, and it's important. Nicole talked about how we're all dying and we're all going to die. And at the end, you're going to reflect on moments of hesitation. And if you're thinking about sharing now, but you're hesitating because of it, and you keep hesitating, when you do get to the point where you're dying or the end of your life and you're reflecting on it, she doesn't want you to have lots of regret if you don't listen to yourself. So it's important to listen to yourself now because life is short, and just do what you're passionate about. And if you feel like sharing, start sharing. Don't let other things get in your way. So after the interview, I asked Nicole if she had any feedback for me as an interviewer and for the podcast, and she just mostly gave compliments. She said that she really enjoyed how I went deep into topics and that I left silence so that she could finish a thought, or maybe another thought comes up during the silence and she can continue, which is something that she said that other interviewers don't tend to do, and she really appreciated that. So she thought that I was a good listener and that I was a good interviewer for her. Now, how am I doing as far as the Why Influence podcast and being the host? Of course, I'm going to say that I need to keep working on incorporating more of myself and bringing myself into the conversation and being vulnerable myself. Do a good job before and after the interview talking with the guest, but not as much during the interview. So that's still something that I'm working on. Another thing is interacting with you. I feel like there's opportunities where I can just sort of pull to the side and say, did you hear that? And talk about the guest and sort of third person addressing you as a listener. So there's some tactics that I'm working on that I would like to get better at with that. Right now, I mostly only address you during the intro and outro because I have more headspace to be able to do that. But I would like to incorporate talking to you during the interview. And that's something that is a little bit difficult for me right now. I'm very happy that I've incorporated the any last words question at the end of the interview. I've been doing that for the past, 6 or 7 interviews, and every single time we get these just value bombs. During the interview, I had made the comment that I'll introduce Nicole to Elaine Fluker, who was also a guest on the show. And after the podcast was over, I did an email introducing Elaine and Nicole. Just copied both of them on it and said that I think that Nicole could be a good guest for Elaine's podcast, which her podcast is a pretty good size, bigger than my podcast audience. So I feel pretty good about being able to help other people. I'm able to help Nicole with her mission by introducing her to someone who's now in my network as a result of me having this podcast. So it's sort of opening doors to helping some people that are out there doing good. And I feel good about that. Now, if you want to learn more about Nicole and get links to all of her websites and her social medias or reach out to her directly, then I suggest you go to the show notes of this episode. So you just go to whyinfluence.com, whyinfluence.com, and go to podcast and navigate to episode 26. That's Nicole Gibson's episode. There you'll have links to everything and all the information you need. Again, our mission here at the Why Influence podcast is to inspire the sharing of hidden knowledge and hidden wisdom so together we can raise the collective consciousness level of the human race. So if you know anybody who has a lot of hidden knowledge and a lot of hidden wisdom who's not sharing and you think they should be sharing, or people that want to share that aren't sharing that need that extra push, then I would really appreciate if you could share this podcast with them, because I think that it could help inspire them and help us on our mission. Now, if you had any profound moments as a result of this podcast, or if anything really made an impact on you, I would really appreciate if you could send me an email or PM me on Instagram, or send a message in just saying that you got XYZ value from the podcast, because right now I'm not hearing too much from the audience. I mostly have iTunes reviews that I can look at, but I don't really get much interaction. There's nowhere for people to really comment about an episode. And if you're not part of the Why Influence community, then I'm not really hearing from you. So if you've got some value from this podcast, I would love for you just send me a message, send me a PM, send me an email or whatever. And speaking of the community, if you want to join the community, then you can go to whydiscord.com, whydiscord.com, join our community. Thank you again for listening. Give yourself a quick pat on the back for making it to the end of the episode, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.